Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gone Fishing here on the 5 Reasons Sports Podcast Network. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe here on YouTube. It helps a lot with the channel and reaching for what we're trying to do here. We got great coverage. The Inter Miami stuff with Messi lately, those guys have been fantastic about getting that coverage out. Dolphins training camp is starting back up. The Hurricanes are starting back up very, very soon in their football season, and the recruiting trail never stops. And the Marlins here, kind of a rocky, no pun intended, kind of a rocky second half here out of the break. 1-8 thus far. The Marlins having lost 8 of 9 here, bringing their record down to 54-47. 7 games over 500 still for the Fish. But there is a lot to talk about, especially with the trade deadline upcoming. And this episode is going to be a little bit different. I'm just going to kind of talk through the different scenarios and some of the things that we've heard, some of the things that have come out in the last 24 hours or so about what the Marlins can accomplish, what they can't accomplish, and what it might cost. So firstly, I want to say that at least among the fan base, I'm not sure that it's a set it and forget it kind of approach on should they buy, should they sell. I do think it's a pretty divisive topic because you've got a lot of people who over the last week and a half say, I don't know if you even really can add to this team enough to make them legitimate playoff contenders. And I don't think that it's completely unfair to say, but I think it almost patently ignores the reality of the fact that they're 7 games over, whether we believe they deserve to be there or not. Because Mish had a spaces last night with some of the Fish on First guys. Shout out to them for their coverage, and he was explaining, and I think it's a good point here. In the first half, the Marlins did get pretty lucky at times, and it's not to say that it was all luck, but were they ever really 14 games over 500 good? I don't know. I don't think so, most likely. I think that the Marlins are and have been kind of, at least in terms of their talent level, about a 500 ball club. And I don't know, especially from the perspective of the people that want to sell. I guess what they're looking at this thing is you're bare bones in the top level of your minor league organization, especially with the injuries to Dax Fulton, to Jake Eater, to Max Meyer. Those 3 guys being hurt right now really significantly dampens the return that you could get for guys like that. And so they're looking at it and they're saying, well, is it really worth it for this team to kind of go all in on this season? And personally, I can appreciate that view of things. I mean, the Marlins have a lot of holes. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm looking at them and I'm looking at the teams around them and I'm looking at the Diamondbacks, right? I'm looking at the Reds. I'm looking at the Dodgers. I'm looking at the Phillies. I'm looking at the Brewers, even, because the NL Central isn't even settled yet. And what I struggle to see with the Marlins is, and this is a point that I made on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Wiedeke. And I hate having to have called out Brian De La Cruz here because I think he's a solid player, but I think my point was something along the lines of Brian De La Cruz, if he's your 3 hitter, you don't have a very good lineup. And that's not to say that he's a bad hitter. I think he'd be great in the 6th slot. But I think the Marlins have a lot of those kind of complementary pieces without pieces that kind of tie it all together. I think additionally in the rotation, you look at some of the holes that are in the rotation. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Sandy being, bad so far this season. And that's not to say that I think he's a bad player, but he's performing badly. Has really mucked up what you do in the rotation. Because now you're looking at a rotation where you were looking at it at the beginning of the season and we said, okay, we have Sandy, We've got Luzardo. We've got Eddie Cabrera. You know, Perez will be up at some point. Trevor Rogers is going to be, you know, he's going to get back to his 2021 form. Johnny Cueto will be a good veteran presence, and maybe Cueto still will be a good veteran presence on the staff. He had a very good start earlier this week, but I think that there's been a lot of strain put on this starting rotation because of the fact that, you know, it's been a little bit of injuries. Edwin Cabrera missed some time. Trevor Rogers has missed significant time. You've had to go in and start guys, you know, that maybe they weren't planning to. They didn't even plan on Braxton Garrett to be in the rotation at the beginning of the season, and he's been one of their better starters. He has significantly cooled lately, but overall over the season, he has been one of their best starters. But overall, I'm just looking at this and I'm saying, you know, number one, there is no substitute for Sandy just pitching better. That's the first thing that needs to happen. You know, I don't know. I think it's far from an Alek Manoah situation where you have to send him down to the Florida Complex League or something like that. But I will say I'm starting to get a little frustrated with the line of thinking being, oh, well, you know, Sandy pitched 6 innings. He allowed 5 runs, but those 5 runs came in 1 inning. He was great those other 5 innings, though. Well, yeah, but he took the team out of the game. With the offense that they currently have, you can't give up more than 3 runs in a single inning. You know, for this staff, and I know that puts a lot of undue pressure on the pitchers. But it goes both ways. It goes both ways because if Sandy's giving up 4 or 5 runs in the first inning, that puts a lot of undue pressure on the lineup to dig them out of that hole. And again, I'm not here to just sit here and dogpile on Sandy, but what I'm getting at is the guy's a Cy Young winner. And it's not from the perspective of, you know, you have to go out there and pitch to an ERA in the low 2s again. I don't expect him to do that. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation, but I do think that he needs to land himself somewhere in the low to mid 3s. Otherwise, this team really isn't going to go anywhere because that's the number one thing that I think has to happen. And then additionally, just more throughout the lineup, you've got guys that have just disappointed. Segura has been better lately, but he's still overall, I think, been, you know, a real kind of sour point in the season to this point because he's a guy that you brought in who was an extremely capable, competitive ball player, professional hitter everywhere he's been. But his first year here, he hasn't been that thus far this season. And I know Gene is a professional. He's been doing this for a long time, but it's nothing personal, especially when you're in a playoff race. The leash gets tightened on guys a little bit when it comes to their playing time. So I'm not saying it to be, you know, to make it personal with one guy, but, you know, the Marlins have to consider other options at third base. And then you look at center field. Dane Myers is starting to cool off. You don't know if Jazz is going to be healthy or when. And that position in and of itself is kind of a huge hole. And now we have to talk about the bullpen. And Craig Mish made some really good points last night in his spaces with the Fish on First guys. And basically he said something to the effect of the Marlins have essentially melted their bullpen. You know, Skip was very aggressive. You know, it was a very noticeable trend from May, you know, from about May onwards that Skip really tightened the reins on his starters and trusted his bullpen a lot. He let guys go. Puck was, you know, going out there almost every night. He had the dead arm IL issue, and he just hasn't been the same since coming back. Mish last night revealed that the A's were very cognizant of letting Puck pitch in back-to-back days because they just felt like his stamina didn't recover as quick as a few other players. And And so I think honestly, if that is the case, then, and I have no reason to believe it's not to be, then it's entirely possible that the Marlins have just fatigued their guys. I mean, Andrew Nardi goes down with an injury. Matt Barnes goes down with an injury and ends up hurting his hip in his rehab assignment. He's done for the year. Dylan Flora was leaned on extremely heavily. Huascar Brazoban was leaned on extremely heavily. This entire bullpen's just been taxed. And I think that if you want to go back to kind of winning in a similar manner to how you did last year, which I think is, or in the first half, which I think is going to be important for this ball club, because I don't think that they're going to win a bunch of 9-8 ball games. They need to focus on getting some relievers. And so I want to shift away from the negative talk about it. Oh, don't bother, buying at the deadline. The minors is bare bones. The fact of the matter is, this team is going to be at least looking to be a buyer, one way or the other. I don't think they should be looking to completely sell. I think that would send a bad message to the fan base. That at 7 games over 500, you're willing to just completely give up on the season. 7 games over right now. Who knows where they'll be at the deadline? They've got 2 against the Rays and 3 against the Tigers upcoming this week. So hopefully by the end of that Tiger series, they might be more games over. They might be 6 games over. Who knows where they'll be at the end of those 5 games? But the point being is, with the Marlins within a few games of a wild card spot, I think it would send the wrong message for them to sell off players and to ultimately, kind of wave the white flag on the season in a year where they're better than they've been over the last 10, 15 years. This is, and I know it's not exactly a high bar to cross with the Marlins' history over the last decade or so, but they're every bit as good as they have been at their best. So in that spirit, I want to get into some of the trade targets that I do think are some of these guys a little bit more pie in the sky, maybe, but some guys that could really help out with the Fish. Firstly, being Justin Lawrence of the Colorado Rockies. We just got to see him up close. Lawrence this year is Lawrence is a right-handed reliever this year. He's 3-3, pitched to a 2.47 ERA. He's got 7 saves, so he does have closing experience. And then on top of that, to be pitching half your games in Coors and still be pitching to a 2.47 ERA as a reliever is really, really impressive stuff. And I think that he would be a welcome addition to this bullpen, especially considering that you are expecting to get Andrew Nardi back within the next few days. At least then you take some pressure off of Floro and Brazoban and some of the other right-handed relievers, Chargois, that you do have in the bullpen there. I do think starting pitching is something that you do want to address. Personally, now this might be a little bit ambitious, considering that this guy has some team control remaining. I'm looking at Brady Singer of the Kansas City Royals. Only 26 years old. This year he struggled. He's 6-8 with a 5.55 ERA. But last year he was 10-5 with a 3.23. He's only 26 years old. He was a first-round pick in 2018 out of the University of Florida. This is a guy that, let's get him into the Marlins, pitcher development program. Let's see what Mel can do with them and see if there's any way that they can kind of go ahead and get him into the fold, just because of the fact that you look at what they did with Luzardo when Luzardo was kind of in a similar spot. Luzardo hadn't had as much major league experience as Singer has now, but Luzardo was kind of that troubled prospect who struggled at the big league level. That he spent some time in the Marlins development program, and he is absolutely taken off. Had a fantastic start just yesterday to help the Marlins break the streak. But Brady Singer is who I would be looking at, honestly, as my top candidate just because he's a guy that's got team control for a little bit longer and could be in the rotation long term, especially if the Marlins are able to kind of fix him. And again, teams that are dealing with the Marlins, they're looking to get some of that young, controllable starting pitching, whether it's Max Meyer, Jake Eater, Dax Fulton, even with the injuries on some guys, Evan Fitterer, Carson Milbrandt, the Marlins still have some very appealing options. And according to Craig Mish, there have been more teams scouting the Marlins, Dominican Summer League teams, and some of their international prospects as well. So, maybe something there in the lower levels of the minor leagues as well. But now we get to the fun part, which is what everybody wants to see. And that is, what are the bats that the Marlins could feasibly add? So if I were to say what I think the number one needs are for the Marlins, I think a middle of the order bat that can, play multiple positions. I think left-handed power plays well at Loan Depot. My number one, and I've tweeted this again and again, Cody Bellinger would be my guy. He comes in, he's a legitimate star in the middle of your lineup. The guy this year is hitting .319 with 14 home runs. He's got a .918 OPS. He plays center field and plays a pretty competent center field too. I know that there's a lot of questions about where would Jazz go? What would you do with Dane Myers? Personally, I think if you're looking to improve the offense by any means necessary, and maybe this hurts your defense just a little bit, I would run Bellinger in center. I'd move Jazz to short. I'd move Dane Myers to third, maybe platoon Wendell and Myers at third for the time being. Let John Birdie go back to being a full-time utility guy. And I think that lengthens out your lineup just to an unbelievable degree. And it takes some of the pressure off of guys that have been carried the offense in the first half, from Arias and Soler, because I think that some of that's starting to catch up to them now. That's another tax that the Marlins are kind of paying here for the success that they had in the first half. And then the other position, and I've made my thoughts known on the Marlins catcher position. I said back in May, I think it was the worst catcher position in baseball. As the ebbs and flows of the season kind of came and went, I had gone to the point with them where I was looking at it, and I kind of, I said, well, maybe I was being a little too harsh on these guys, but no, they have the worst catching position in baseball right now, and I think that absolutely needs to be addressed. I think the perfect guy to address it would be Yasmani Grandal. The White Sox are absolutely going to be sellers. There's going to be some money that you would have to take on in the deal, sure. But Grandal's a veteran catcher. He's been there, done that. He's a very good defensive catcher. He's hitting .255 on the season with 8 home runs. And I know that doesn't sound sterling, but when you compare it to the production or lack thereof currently, quite frankly, that they've gotten from guys like Jacob Stallings and Nick Fortes, I think that would absolutely be a boon in the bottom of their lineup to replace, a position that's had such a dearth of production with even moderate production would be fantastic for them. And then third base, the guy that I think has been linked to the Marlins the most out of all the potential trade candidates out there would be Nationals third baseman Yeimer Candelario. Another guy that gives you a little bit more thump in the middle of your order. He's hitting .254 on the season, 15 homers, and .807 OPS. He would kind of be that mid-range guy. He could be a solid 5 hitter on a lot of teams. He would probably come in and be the Marlins' number 3 guy over De La Cruz or Sanchez. And again, it does lengthen the lineup out in a way that I think, makes it a lot harder on opposing pitchers, because then you're looking at Arias to Soler to Candelario to Sanchez to De La Cruz to Cooper to, and this is in no particular order, but you get what I'm saying with this. You get maybe 6 or 7 in before you kind of squint or kind of wince at a name in the order there. And then last but not least, one of my favorite candidates would be Tim Anderson of the Chicago White Sox. Now, Anderson's had an abysmal season. I'm going to call it like it is. He's hitting 241 on the season, has not hit a single home run. He's got a 564 OPS. But you can't ignore that the guy was probably one of the best shortstops in baseball over the last 4 years. Over his last 4 years, it's been essentially, his production's come out to be about a 2020 guy that hits 310 at the shortstop position. Again, he's another guy that, maybe a change of scenery kind of revitalizes him. And add it to the middle of this order could make things really potent. And Anderson, with his speed, gives you another element there that, there's another guy that you have to consider on the bases. Right now the Marlins, realistically, they don't have a lot of guys that are base stealing threats on the roster right now. You've got John Birdie, you've got Garrett Hampson, and honestly, that's kind of about it at the moment. I mean, you've got guys that are capable of getting you a base, whether it's Segura or Wendell. But ideally, I think you can really, down the stretch, cause a little bit of chaos, especially when Jazz comes back, on those days where you've got Birdie playing third and it's Birdie and Anderson and Jazz, and those guys are all prolific base stealing threats. So those are some of the guys that I would like to see the Marlins add. At this point, the Marlins off today. They return to play tomorrow against the Tampa Bay Rays in Tampa for a 2-game series. So, hopefully they end up splitting that one some way, somehow, before getting that series against Detroit. It has been an absolutely brutal second half start for the Marlins. I mean, the alarm bells have to be ringing in the front office. I'm just hoping that they are ringing in the direction of spurring them to do something to improve the roster, to give them a better shot at making the playoffs, if for no other reason than to give the fans something to cheer for down the stretch. Even if they get socked by the Braves or the Dodgers or whoever in the first round of the playoffs, or they don't even make it out of their wild card game, I think it would just be kind of a positive checkpoint for the organization. You go out and you get a rise. You extended Sandy a couple of years ago. It just feels like a natural progression of that would be to reach the postseason and then improve on the roster from there in the offseason and try to find a way to make this thing sustainable. But that has been all for me today. We will be back next Monday, which would be September 31st, or trade deadline eve, as many people are want to call it. And so that'll be a ton of fun. Until then, remember, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We will be touching base on all of these subjects as the trade deadline approaches. Emergency shows will be done if deals are agreed to. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time.